"The car belongs to this dealership," Richard Coleman said, with two police officers standing only a few feet away. Marcus Bennett looked at the black luxury sport utility vehicle behind him, then at the two key fobs resting in his open palm. He had spent 43 years learning that sometimes the calmest answer was also the hardest one to ignore. "Then you might want to explain why your dealership gave me both keys." Richard's expression tightened. The late afternoon sun poured through the dealership's glass walls, reflecting across polished cars lined beneath bright showroom lights. Outside the delivery entrance, Marcus's new vehicle sat exactly where an employee had positioned it less than 20 minutes earlier. A white inventory sticker was still attached to the windshield. That small rectangle of paper had apparently become more convincing to Richard than the black man holding the keys. Officer Sarah Mitchell glanced from Marcus to Richard. "Let me understand this correctly," she said. "You called because you believe this gentleman is attempting to take that vehicle?" "That vehicle was sold," Richard replied. Marcus gave a slow nod. "Yes, it was." Richard looked toward him. "Sir, I have already asked you not to interfere." Marcus said nothing for a moment. He wore a navy button-down shirt, dark slacks, and work boots that still carried faint traces of dust from a construction site he had visited that morning. There was no expensive watch on his wrist, no tailored suit, nothing announcing that he owned a successful construction company or that 15 years of early mornings and late invoices had finally given him the freedom to walk into a luxury dealership and pay for exactly what he wanted. None of that should have mattered. Officer Mitchell turned back to Richard. "Who bought the vehicle?" Richard hesitated. "Finance would have that information." "Did you check before calling us?" Another pause. Marcus watched Richard's face change almost imperceptibly. Not enough to admit doubt, just enough to reveal it. "I had a suspicious situation developing," Richard said. "I made the decision I thought was appropriate." Marcus looked down at the key fobs again. One had a small dealership tag attached to it. The other had been placed into a black presentation box before finance manager Emily Parker handed both to him. Marcus had signed the buyer's order. The payment had cleared. Temporary registration had been issued. Somewhere inside the building, a computer already knew what Richard had refused to learn. The vehicle was Marcus's. It had been Marcus's before Richard confronted him. It had been Marcus's before anyone mentioned calling the police. And it was still Marcus's now. "I showed him the confirmation email," Marcus told Officer Mitchell. "I showed him the temporary registration. I asked him to check the sales system." Sarah looked at Richard. "Did he?" Richard shifted his weight. "He showed me documents on his phone, but I could not independently confirm them." Marcus finally looked directly at him. "I asked you to independently confirm them." Silence. That was the part Richard seemed unable to explain. Imagine standing beside something you legally purchased while another person tells the police that you are trying to take it, not because the records are unclear, but because nobody bothered to open them. Marcus could have raised his voice. He could have listed everything he owned. He could have demanded the general manager. Instead, he placed both key fobs carefully on the hood of the sport utility vehicle. Two small pieces of plastic and metal. Quiet evidence. "Officer," Marcus said, "you do not have to take my word for anything. Ask him to pull up the vehicle identification number and check today's completed sales." Sarah nodded. "That sounds reasonable." Richard looked toward the showroom doors. For the first time, his confidence weakened. "Finance is busy." Sarah held his gaze. "Then we can wait." Marcus almost smiled, but did not. He had already been waiting. Waiting while Richard questioned why he was near the vehicle. Waiting while Richard dismissed the registration. Waiting while a simple database search remained undone. Richard reached for the tablet tucked beneath his arm, but stopped before opening it. "There is context you are missing." Marcus looked at him steadily. "Then check the system and give us the context." Richard did not move. Behind the glass wall, employees had begun noticing the two patrol vehicles outside. A few customers glanced toward the delivery lane. Sarah remained patient. Marcus remained still. And Richard remained trapped between the assumption that had brought the police there and the screen that could destroy it with one search. What none of them could change was the timestamp already buried inside the dealership's records. The sale had been completed before the call to police was ever made. The keys were only the beginning of what those records were about to reveal. 2 hours earlier, Marcus Bennett had pulled into the dealership in a 12-year-old silver pickup truck with 186,000 miles on the odometer and enough dust along the wheel wells to prove it still worked for a living. He parked between two polished luxury sedans, turned off the engine, and sat quietly for a moment looking through the windshield at the glass showroom ahead. He had imagined this afternoon differently. Not dramatically. Marcus was not interested in applause. He simply wanted to enjoy something he had worked 15 years to afford without wondering whether the next payroll cycle would punish him for it. His construction company had begun with 3 employees, 1 used trailer, and more optimism than money. Now it employed 42 people and managed commercial projects across 3 counties. The black luxury sport utility vehicle waiting inside was not a symbol Marcus needed anyone else to understand. It was a promise he had made to himself years ago, back when every unexpected repair bill felt like an emergency. His phone showed a confirmation email from finance manager Emily Parker. Final appointment. 3:30 p.m. Buyer order confirmed. Marcus slipped the phone into his pocket and entered the showroom. Richard Coleman noticed him almost immediately. Richard was 46, neatly dressed in a gray suit with a dealership badge clipped near his jacket pocket. He had spent years learning how to identify customers who were ready to buy, customers who were browsing, and customers he believed were wasting time. Marcus had been inside less than 30 seconds when Richard decided which category he belonged in. "Good afternoon," Richard said. "Can I help you find something?" "Yes. I am here to pick up a vehicle." Richard glanced through the glass toward Marcus's old pickup. "Of course. Are you working with our pre-owned department?" Marcus looked at him. "No, we have several excellent certified vehicles if you are still deciding." "I am not deciding." Marcus took out his phone. "I purchased the black sport utility vehicle with the premium package." Emily Parker handled the paperwork. Richard's polite smile paused. "You purchased it?" "That is what I said." Before Richard could respond, a woman emerged from the finance corridor carrying a folder. "Mr. Bennett." Emily Parker smiled as she approached. "Perfect timing. I have everything ready." Marcus nodded. "Good to see you." Emily turned briefly toward Richard. "I have him." Richard looked from Emily to Marcus, then stepped aside. It should have ended there. Instead, his eyes followed Marcus all the way into the finance office. At 3:41 p.m., Marcus reviewed the buyer's order. At 3:53, he signed the final documents. At 4:06, Emily confirmed that the funds had cleared. At 4:17, the transaction was entered as complete. Sold. Buyer, Marcus Bennett. Emily printed the temporary registration and slid it across the desk. "Congratulations." Marcus looked at the amount one final time, then smiled. "That took me longer than I would like to admit." Emily laughed softly. "The paperwork or deciding to buy it?" "Deciding I was allowed to enjoy what I worked for." Emily reached into a drawer and removed a black presentation box. Inside were 2 key fobs. She placed them in Marcus's hands. "Then enjoy it." Outside the finance office, an employee moved the vehicle into the delivery lane. The black paint reflected the afternoon sun across the dealership windows. One detail had been overlooked. The white inventory sticker remained attached to the inside of the windshield. Emily noticed it as she and Marcus stepped into the hallway. They were supposed to remove that. "I can wait." Her desk phone began ringing. Another employee appeared at the finance doorway and told her a customer needed immediate assistance with a contract discrepancy. Emily sighed. "Give me 5 minutes. The vehicle is yours. Go ahead and take a look. I will meet you outside and make sure everything is set." Marcus placed the temporary registration inside his document folder and walked toward the delivery entrance alone. Richard stood near the showroom reception desk when Marcus passed. He noticed the 2 key fobs. He noticed Marcus heading toward the black sport utility vehicle, but he had not been present when the payment cleared. He had not seen the signed documents. And instead of asking Emily, he returned to the assumption he had formed when Marcus arrived in an old pickup. Outside, Marcus pressed the unlock button. The vehicle lights flashed. He opened the driver's door and looked inside for the first time as its legal owner. Behind him, the showroom door opened. "Sir," Richard called sharply. Marcus turned. Richard was walking toward him, eyes fixed on the inventory sticker still attached to the windshield. "Step away from that vehicle." Marcus looked at the key in his hand, then at Richard. "Why?" Richard stopped several feet away. "Because that car has already been sold." Marcus held his gaze for a long second. "I know." Marcus remained beside the open driver's door, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the door, while the other held the key fob that had unlocked it seconds earlier. "I know it has been sold," he repeated. Richard stopped several feet away. Then you understand why you cannot be inside it. Marcus studied him, waiting for the obvious connection to arrive. It did not. Who do you think bought it? Richard's expression hardened. That information is private. Then perhaps you should check before telling the buyer to step away from his own vehicle. For a moment, Richard simply stared at him. Then his eyes moved to Marcus's work boots, his navy shirt, and finally toward the old silver pickup parked across the lot. It was a quick glance, but Marcus noticed it. He had noticed the same glance when he first entered the showroom. Sir, I am asking you one more time to step away from the vehicle. Marcus slowly closed the driver's door. Fine. He took one step back. Now check your system. Richard looked at the key fob. Where did you get that? Marcus almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the question. Finance gave it to me. Who in finance? Emily Parker. Emily would not release keys without completed paperwork. Marcus nodded. Correct. The answer should have ended the conversation. Instead, Richard looked toward the showroom as if Marcus had somehow presented another problem instead of the solution. Marcus reached into the document folder he was carrying and removed the temporary registration. Here. Richard took it reluctantly. His eyes moved across the page. Marcus Bennett. Vehicle description. Temporary registration information. The details matched the black sport utility vehicle standing beside them. Richard handed it back. I still need to confirm this with finance. Then confirm it. Richard did not move. Marcus waited. 5 seconds. 10. Customers passed behind the glass showroom wall. An employee near the reception desk looked outside, then quickly returned to his computer. Marcus opened the confirmation email on his phone. This is the buyer order. This is Emily's email confirming my appointment. And that registration came from your finance office. Richard barely looked at the screen. Documents can be misunderstood. Marcus lowered the phone. What exactly are you misunderstanding? Richard's jaw tightened. Your attitude is not helping. Marcus looked at him with quiet disbelief. His voice had never risen. He had stepped away when asked. He had shown the keys, registration, and confirmation email. Yet somehow each answer was being treated as another reason to question him. My attitude does not determine ownership, Marcus said. Your records do. Richard folded his arms. I am responsible for protecting dealership inventory. Marcus looked at the white sticker still inside the windshield. Suddenly he understood. Richard had seen the sticker. He had seen Marcus. He had seen the old pickup. And somewhere between those three things, he had constructed a story without checking whether any part of it was true. That sticker should have been removed, Marcus said. Emily already told me that. Richard shook his head. Until I confirm the sale, this vehicle remains dealership property. Marcus held up the key fob. The sale was confirmed before I walked outside. According to you. The words landed harder than Richard seemed to realize. Marcus became very still. Imagine handing someone a document printed by their own business, standing beside a vehicle their employee gave you keys to, and hearing that the truth only counts if they decide you look believable enough to tell it. Marcus pointed through the glass toward the showroom. Your sales system is 20 yards away. Richard said nothing. Check the vehicle identification number. Call Emily. Ask the employee who moved the car into this lane. Pick one. Richard's eyes narrowed. I do not need you telling me how to handle security. Then handle it. Marcus placed both key fobs carefully on the hood where Richard could see them. Verify the sale. Richard glanced at the keys, but still did not reach for his tablet. Instead, he took out his phone. Marcus watched him unlock the screen. Who are you calling? Richard looked directly at him. The police. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Before checking your own sales record? I have a suspicious situation involving a high-value vehicle. Marcus nodded slowly, the last trace of disbelief settling into clarity. No. You have a customer standing beside a car he already paid for. Richard raised the phone to his ear. Marcus did not reach for the keys. He did not argue. He simply stepped another pace away from the vehicle and waited while Richard made the call. Inside the showroom, less than 20 yards from where they stood, the dealership computer already held the answer in plain text. Sold. Payment cleared. Buyer, Marcus Bennett. Richard could have found it in seconds. Instead, he chose a different number. Richard turned slightly away as the call connected, but Marcus could still hear enough to understand how the situation was being described. Yes, I am the sales manager at Coleman Ridge Motors. We have an individual refusing to leave a vehicle in our delivery area. Marcus looked at the black sport utility vehicle beside him. The word refusing caught his attention. He had stepped away when Richard asked. He was standing several feet from the vehicle with both key fobs resting visibly on the hood. The vehicle has already been sold, Richard continued. I am concerned he may be attempting to take possession without authorization. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. There it was again. A version of events that somehow removed every piece of information Richard had been given. No mention of the temporary registration. No mention of Emily Parker. No mention of the confirmation email. No mention that Marcus had asked him repeatedly to check the sales system. Richard ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. An officer is on the way. Marcus nodded. Good. Richard seemed surprised. Good. Yes. Maybe the officer will ask you the question you keep avoiding. And what question is that? Marcus pointed through the showroom glass. Who bought the car? Richard's face tightened. I told you I need finance to confirm that. Finance is inside. They are occupied. Marcus looked toward the dealership entrance. Your computer is inside. Richard said nothing. Your tablet is under your arm. Still nothing. Marcus folded his hands in front of him. You have spent more time refusing to check than checking would have taken. Richard glanced toward the key fobs on the hood. Those keys do not prove ownership. No, Marcus said. The completed sale does. A few employees were openly watching now. One salesman stood near the reception desk pretending to organize paperwork while looking outside every few seconds. Another employee walked past the delivery doors, recognized Marcus from earlier, and slowed down. Richard noticed and motioned for him to continue. Marcus saw that too. The entire dealership seemed to be gathering pieces of a truth Richard was determined not to assemble. 5 minutes later, a patrol vehicle entered the lot. Then another. Officer Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the first car with her partner, Officer Daniel Foster. Sarah approached without urgency, taking in the scene before speaking. A manager in a gray suit. A black customer standing calmly several feet from a luxury vehicle. 2 key fobs on the hood. No shouting. No confrontation. Who made the call? She asked. Richard raised his hand slightly. I did. Richard Coleman. Sales manager. Sarah nodded. Tell me what happened. Richard gestured toward the vehicle. This gentleman was inside a vehicle that has already been sold. I asked him to step away while I confirmed his authorization. He became argumentative and insisted the vehicle belonged to him. Marcus looked at Sarah but did not interrupt. She noticed. And did he step away? Richard paused. Eventually. Marcus spoke calmly. Immediately. Sarah looked between them. All right. Sir, your name? Marcus Bennett. Mr. Bennett. What is your understanding of the situation? Marcus pointed toward the vehicle. I purchased it today. Finance completed the transaction. I received the temporary registration and both keys. Mr. Coleman saw me near the vehicle, decided I was not the buyer, and called you before checking his own records. Richard shook his head. That is not accurate. Sarah turned toward him. Which part? Richard opened his mouth, then stopped. Marcus removed the temporary registration from his folder and handed it to Sarah. She read the name and vehicle information carefully. Marcus Bennett, she said. This appears to match the vehicle. Exactly, Marcus replied. Richard stepped closer. That document still needs to be confirmed through finance. Sarah handed the registration back to Marcus. Then let us confirm it. Richard glanced toward the showroom. Finance is handling another customer. Sarah looked at the tablet beneath his arm. Do you have access to completed sales? Yes. Can you search by vehicle identification number? Richard hesitated. Yes. Sarah nodded toward the sport utility vehicle. Then check. Silence settled across the delivery lane. Richard slowly activated the tablet. Marcus watched without satisfaction. He had never wanted the police there. He had never wanted an audience. He had wanted to pick up his car and drive home. Richard entered the final digits of the vehicle identification number. The screen loaded. His eyes moved across the record. Something in his face changed. Sarah noticed immediately. What does it say? Richard did not answer. Mr. Coleman? He swallowed. It says the vehicle was sold. Sarah waited. To whom? Richard stared at the screen as if the name might change if he waited long enough. It did not. Marcus stood quietly beside the vehicle, the same man he had been before anyone checked the database. Finally, Richard lifted his eyes. Marcus Bennett. For several seconds, the only sound in the delivery lane came from traffic moving beyond the dealership lot. Richard held the tablet in both hands, staring at the record that had been available to him from the beginning. Marcus Bennett. Sale completed. Payment cleared. The vehicle identification number matched. Officer Sarah Mitchell looked at Richard, then at Marcus, then back at the screen. So Mr. Bennett is the buyer? She asked. Richard cleared his throat. According to the system, yes. Marcus did not react. The words according to the system almost made it sound as though ownership were still some technical possibility rather than a completed fact. Sarah noticed the hesitation too. Is there anything in that record showing the transaction was canceled or incomplete? Richard scrolled down. No. Any hold on the vehicle? No. Any reason Mr. Bennett should not have the keys? Richard's eyes moved toward the two key fobs resting on the hood. No. Officer Daniel Foster remained several feet away, quietly observing. Sarah looked at Marcus. Mr. Bennett, it appears the records support exactly what you told us. Marcus nodded once. They supported it before you arrived. Richard lowered the tablet. This was clearly a misunderstanding. Marcus turned toward him. His expression remained calm, but something in his eyes had changed. A misunderstanding would have ended when I showed you the registration. Richard started to respond. Marcus continued. Or when I showed you the confirmation email. Or when I told you Emily Parker completed the paperwork. Or when I asked you to check that tablet. Sarah said nothing. She did not need to. The silence gave every sentence room to settle. Richard glanced toward the employees watching through the showroom windows. I was responsible for protecting dealership property. Marcus looked at the black sport utility vehicle. It was not dealership property anymore. At that moment, the glass doors opened behind them. Emily Parker stepped outside carrying a folder, her pace quickening when she saw the patrol vehicles. Marcus. She looked genuinely confused. What happened? Marcus turned toward her. Richard believed I was trying to take the vehicle. Emily stopped. Her eyes moved to Richard. What? Richard raised one hand. There was confusion about whether the delivery had been completed. Emily's confusion disappeared. There was no confusion in finance. I completed it myself. She opened the folder. Payment cleared at 4:06. Final sale posted at 4:17. I gave him both keys. Sarah looked toward Richard. What time did you call us? Daniel checked the dispatch information on his device. The call came in at 4:36. Emily looked at the clock displayed through the showroom entrance, then back at Marcus. 19 minutes. Marcus had legally owned the vehicle for 19 minutes before Richard called the police to protect it from him. Richard's face lost color. I did not know finance had finished the transaction. Marcus answered immediately. That is why I told you to ask finance. You have to understand how this looked. The sentence changed the atmosphere. Emily looked at Richard. Sarah's expression became more attentive. Marcus remained completely still. How did it look? He asked. Richard hesitated. A customer was accessing a high-value vehicle that still had an inventory sticker. Marcus nodded toward the old silver pickup across the lot. And Richard said nothing. Marcus did not accuse him. He did not need to put words into Richard's mouth. He simply waited. Emily looked toward the pickup, then toward Marcus's work boots, and understanding crossed her face. Richard, she said quietly, I walked Mr. Bennett into finance in front of you. Richard looked at her. I did not know what he was doing there. You could have asked me. You were busy. Emily held up the folder. Then you could have checked the sale. Richard looked down. The dealership doors opened again. A tall man in a navy suit stepped outside, followed by another employee. David Lawson, the general manager, had apparently been told why two police vehicles were sitting in his delivery lane. What is happening? He asked. Richard straightened. David, there was a misunderstanding involving a delivery. Sarah looked toward David. Are you the general manager? Yes. Then you may want to hear the full sequence before calling it a misunderstanding. David's expression became serious. Sarah explained only what she could establish. Marcus had documentation. Finance confirmed the completed transaction. The dealership database listed Marcus as the buyer. The sale had posted at 4:17. Police were called at 4:36. David slowly turned toward Richard. Did you check the sales record before calling? Richard did not answer immediately. That pause was enough. David looked toward Marcus. Mr. Bennett, I am very sorry. Marcus picked up the two key fobs from the hood. I appreciate the apology. Then he looked at Richard. But the important question is not when you finally learned I owned this car. Richard met his eyes. Marcus held up the keys. It is why you decided I could not own it before you checked. David Lawson did not answer immediately. His eyes moved from Marcus to Richard, then toward the tablet still displaying the completed sale. Around them, the dealership had become strangely quiet. Employees who had been watching from behind the glass were suddenly finding reasons to look elsewhere. Officer Sarah Mitchell remained nearby, not because Marcus needed protection from anyone, but because the call that had brought her there now required an accurate conclusion. David finally spoke. "Richard, I asked you a question. Did you check the sales record before calling the police?" Richard looked down at the tablet. "No. Did Mr. Bennett tell you he had completed the purchase?" "Yes." "Did he show you documentation?" Richard hesitated. "He showed me a temporary registration and an email." "Did he give you the name of the finance manager?" "Yes." Emily Parker stood beside Marcus holding the transaction folder against her chest. David's expression tightened. "Then what exactly did you verify before making that call?" Richard exhaled slowly. "I saw someone accessing a vehicle that still had an inventory sticker. I thought I needed to protect the dealership." Marcus listened carefully. Richard was still describing what he had seen, but not why he had ignored everything that followed. "That explains your first question," Marcus said. "It does not explain the next 19 minutes. Richard looked at him. Marcus continued in the same measured tone. "You saw the sticker and asked me to step away. Fine. I stepped away. Then I told you I bought the vehicle. I showed you the registration. I showed you the confirmation email. I gave you Emily's name. I asked you to check your system." Marcus gestured toward the tablet. "You had the answer in your hand." David turned toward Emily. "Can you confirm the timeline?" She opened the folder. "Mr. Bennett signed the final paperwork before 4 o'clock. Funds were confirmed at 4:06. The sale posted at 4:17. I handed him both key fobs and told him the vehicle was his. I was called back into finance before I could finish the delivery walkthrough." David looked toward the windshield. "And the inventory sticker?" Emily shook her head. "Delivery staff missed it." Marcus gave a small nod. "A sticker was left on my windshield, and somehow that mistake became evidence against me." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Nobody said it was evidence against you." Marcus met his eyes. "You called the police." Silence returned. Sarah glanced at Daniel Foster, then back toward David. "From our standpoint, there is no ownership dispute. Mr. Bennett's documents match the dealership record, and your finance manager has confirmed the completed transaction." David nodded. "Understood." Sarah looked at Marcus. "Mr. Bennett, unless there is another issue we need to address, you are free to continue with your vehicle." Marcus almost smiled at the strange wording. Free to continue with something that had already belonged to him before the patrol cars entered the lot. "Thank you, officer." Sarah gave him a respectful nod. She and Daniel walked back toward their vehicles, leaving the dealership with a problem no police report could solve for it. David turned to Richard. "Come inside." Richard glanced at Marcus. "David, I can explain." Inside, the word was quiet but final. Before Richard moved, Marcus spoke. "Mr. Lawson." David turned. "Yes. I want this documented. It will be. Not as a customer service misunderstanding." David paused. Marcus continued. "Your employee had every reasonable way to verify what I told him. He chose not to use any of them before calling the police. That distinction matters." David nodded slowly. "I understand. I hope you do." Marcus looked through the showroom windows. His old pickup sat across the lot, faded and dusty beneath the late afternoon light. He suddenly understood how much of Richard's assumption had probably been formed before a single word was exchanged. The truck, the work boots, the simple shirt, his skin. None of those things appeared on the sales contract. Yet somehow they had carried more weight than the documents that did. Emily stepped closer. "Marcus, I am sorry. I should have stayed with you through the delivery." Marcus shook his head. "You completed your job. You gave me the keys. But if I had been there, this might not have happened." Marcus looked toward Richard as he followed David inside. "That is exactly why it matters that you were not." Emily frowned slightly. Marcus explained. "I should not need someone from finance standing beside me to make my paperwork believable." Emily lowered her eyes. "You are right." David stopped at the showroom door and looked back toward Marcus. "We will review the security footage, the transaction record, and the call timeline. I will contact you personally." Marcus nodded. He did not threaten a lawsuit. He did not demand Richard be fired. He did not ask for free service or compensation. He wanted something harder than a discount. He wanted the dealership to look directly at the choices that had been made. Richard had seen a man beside an expensive vehicle and formed an assumption. The first assumption might have been corrected in seconds. The registration gave him that chance. The email gave him another. Emily's name gave him another. The sales database gave him one more. Richard ignored every exit from his mistake until flashing patrol lights arrived to make the mistake impossible to hide. Marcus opened the driver's door again. This time nobody told him to step away. But before getting inside, he looked at the white inventory sticker still clinging to the windshield. The car had been sold. The payment had cleared. The keys had been delivered. The only thing that had remained unsold was Richard's assumption, and he had held on to it long after the truth became available. Marcus did not drive away immediately. He sat behind the wheel with the door closed and both hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, watching the dealership through the windshield. The white inventory sticker remained in the upper corner of the glass, almost absurdly small compared with everything it had helped set in motion. Inside, David Lawson led Richard Coleman into his office while Emily Parker returned to finance. Marcus could have started the engine and left the entire afternoon behind him. Instead, he waited, not for revenge, not for Richard to come outside embarrassed. He waited because David had promised the incident would be documented, and Marcus had learned long ago that promises mattered most when someone was willing to put them in writing. 20 minutes later, David walked back into the delivery lane carrying a folder. Richard was not with him. Marcus stepped out of the vehicle. "Mr. Bennett, may I have a few minutes?" "Of course." David stopped several feet away. "We reviewed the sales record and the available security footage. I also spoke with Emily and 2 employees who were in the showroom." Marcus listened. "The timeline is clear," David continued. "You arrived for a scheduled delivery. Finance completed the sale at 4:17. You were given both keys and temporary registration. Richard approached you after that. You told him you were the buyer and asked him to verify the transaction." "Yes." David looked down at the folder. "The security footage does not record clear audio outside, but it shows you stepping away from the vehicle when Richard approached. It also shows him using his phone before accessing the sales record on his tablet." Marcus's expression did not change. That detail mattered. Richard had described the situation to police as if verification had been underway. The footage showed something simpler. The call came first. The facts came later. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. David exhaled. "Richard has been removed from customer-facing duties while we conduct an internal review. I am also reporting the incident to our regional operations director." Marcus nodded. "That sounds appropriate." David hesitated. "I would also like to offer you a complimentary maintenance package and an extended service agreement." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "Why?" David seemed surprised by the question. "As an acknowledgement of what happened." "Then acknowledge what happened." "We are." "A service package is not an acknowledgement." Marcus's voice remained calm. "It is compensation." David lowered the folder slightly. "I understand the distinction." "Good. I am not asking you to give me anything." Marcus glanced toward the showroom. "I am asking you to make sure the next customer does not have to produce a finance manager, 2 police officers, and a sales database before one of your employees accepts a valid explanation." David absorbed the words quietly. "That is fair. It should be normal." Inside David's office, Richard sat alone looking at the same tablet that had ended the confrontation. The completed transaction remained visible. Buyer, Marcus Bennett. Richard replayed the afternoon in his mind. Marcus arriving in the old pickup. Marcus walking toward the new vehicle. The inventory sticker. The work boots. The keys. Richard had told himself each observation was part of professional instinct. But now he had to confront what his instinct had ignored. Marcus had not run. He had not concealed anything. He had provided documentation. He had named Emily. He had repeatedly asked Richard to verify the sale. Every new fact should have weakened suspicion. Instead, Richard had treated cooperation as something suspicious in itself. David returned to the office several minutes later. "I need you to answer something," he said. Richard looked up. "Why did you call the police before checking the sale?" "I thought there was a risk." "Based on what?" Richard glanced toward the window. Marcus was visible outside beside the sport utility vehicle. "The circumstances." David pulled out a chair. "Describe the circumstances." Richard began with the inventory sticker. David reminded him that delivery staff had forgotten to remove it. Richard mentioned the vehicle's value. David reminded him that Marcus had the keys. Richard mentioned uncertainty about the paperwork. David reminded him that Marcus had shown temporary registration and provided Emily's name. One explanation after another disappeared under its own facts. Finally, David asked, "What did you see when Mr. Bennett first arrived?" Richard looked through the glass toward the old silver pickup. He did not answer. He did not have to. Outside, Marcus carefully peeled the inventory sticker from the windshield. It came away slowly, leaving a faint rectangle against the clean glass. Emily stepped outside and offered him a cloth to remove the residue. "There," she said when the glass was clear. "Now it finally looks like yours." Marcus looked at the vehicle, then at her. "Emily, it looked like mine the moment I paid for it." She paused, then nodded. "You are right." Marcus placed the removed sticker inside his document folder rather than throwing it away. Not because it had value, but because it reminded him how easily appearances could become assumptions when someone stopped checking facts. Through the showroom window, Richard watched Marcus open the driver's door. For the first time that afternoon, Richard was not asking whether Marcus belonged behind that wheel. He was beginning to ask why he had been so certain that he did not. 3 days later, Marcus received a call from David Lawson just after noon. Marcus was standing inside a half-finished office building while his crew reviewed electrical plans 2 floors below. He stepped into a quiet hallway and answered. "Mr. Bennett, I wanted to update you personally," David said. "Our internal review is complete." Marcus looked through an unfinished window opening toward the city skyline. "I am listening." David explained that the dealership had reviewed the transaction timestamps, security footage, employee statements, and Richard's account. Nothing changed the sequence Marcus already knew. The sale had been completed at 4:17 p.m. Richard had confronted Marcus afterward. Marcus had shown documentation and repeatedly requested verification. Richard had called police at 4:36 without first checking the completed sales record. "Richard will receive formal corrective action," David said. "He will also complete additional customer bias and decision-making training before returning to a customer-facing position." Marcus remained quiet. "We are changing our delivery procedure as well," David continued. "Sold vehicles will have inventory stickers removed before customers receive keys. Any ownership question involving a delivery vehicle must be checked against the sales system before security or police are contacted, unless there is an immediate safety concern." That caught Marcus's attention. "That matters more to me than what happens to one employee." "I thought it might." David paused. "Richard has also asked whether you would be willing to speak with him." Marcus looked down at the dusty floor beneath his work boots. The same boots Richard had noticed before noticing the evidence. "Why?" "He wants to apologize." Marcus could have said no. Nobody would have blamed him. But an apology, if it was real, was not something Marcus feared hearing. 10 minutes, he said. The following afternoon, Marcus returned to the dealership. His new sport utility vehicle was clean, the windshield free of the white sticker that had helped start everything. Richard waited inside a small conference room without his sales badge. When Marcus entered, Richard stood. "Mr. Bennett." "Richard." They sat across from each other. For several seconds, neither spoke. Richard finally broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Marcus waited. "I handled that situation badly. I should have checked the sale immediately." Marcus nodded. "Yes." Richard seemed almost surprised by the simplicity of the answer. "I kept telling myself I was protecting dealership property." Marcus leaned back slightly. "But it was not dealership property." "I know. You could have known then." Richard lowered his eyes. "I know that too." Marcus studied him. "So what changed?" Richard looked toward the conference room window. "David made me go through the timeline one decision at a time. Every time I tried to explain why I was suspicious, there was another fact I had ignored." Marcus said nothing. Richard continued. "The keys. The registration. Emily's name. The email. Your request that I check the system." His voice became quieter. "I had opportunities to correct myself, and I did not take them." Marcus held his gaze. "Why not?" Richard took a long breath. "Because I had already decided what I thought was happening." "Before you checked?" "Yes." "Before you knew who I was?" Richard hesitated. "Yes." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "That is the part you need to remember." Richard nodded. "I will." Marcus's expression remained calm. "Do not remember it because I own a construction company. Do not remember it because I could afford that vehicle. And do not remember it because your general manager reviewed the footage." Richard listened. "Remember it for the next person who walks through that door and does not look like the customer you expected." The words landed without anger. That made them harder to dismiss. Richard looked down at his hands. You are right. Marcus stood. Then make the apology useful. Richard stood as well. I am sorry, Mr. Bennett. Marcus gave a small nod and walked out. Emily was near the finance desk when he passed. She smiled. Everything all right? Marcus glanced toward the showroom windows and the vehicle waiting outside. It will depend on what happens after today. He walked through the doors and crossed the delivery lane. Nobody followed him. Nobody questioned the keys in his hand. Nobody asked him to prove the vehicle was his. Marcus opened the driver's door and paused before getting inside. He thought about the dealership's new policy. A sales record checked before assumptions became accusations. A simple verification before a phone call changed someone's afternoon. It was not dramatic. That was precisely the point. Fairness should not require a dramatic rescue. Richard had believed the lesson began when police arrived. Marcus understood something different. The real moment had come earlier, when the truth was available and one man chose not to look. Justice did not need Richard humiliated. It needed him to recognize that choice, because the next customer might not have two keys, a finance manager, and a completed sales record waiting to prove what should have been checked from the beginning. 6 weeks later, Marcus Bennett returned to the dealership on a Saturday morning for the first scheduled service on his sport utility vehicle. The difference was visible before he even stepped through the doors. A delivery employee removed inventory stickers from sold vehicles before moving them into the customer lane. Another employee stood beside a computer terminal confirming a buyer's name against the completed sales record. The process took seconds. No suspicion, no argument, just verification. Marcus handed his keys to the service advisor and walked toward the waiting area. Across the showroom, Richard Coleman was speaking with an older couple beside a sedan. He noticed Marcus and paused. Their eyes met. Richard gave a respectful nod. Marcus returned it. Nothing more was necessary. David Lawson approached a few minutes later. Good to see you again, Mr. Bennett. Good morning. David looked toward the delivery lane. We have used the new verification procedure 11 times since your visit. Marcus glanced through the glass. Any problems? None. David smiled faintly. Turns out checking the record is faster than arguing about it. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. That was always my point. David nodded. I know. Marcus sat near the window while technicians completed the service. Outside, his old silver pickup was nowhere to be seen. He had given it to one of his longtime foremen, whose truck had finally stopped running. Yet Marcus understood something now that he had not fully understood that afternoon. If he had arrived in a tailored suit and an expensive watch, perhaps Richard would have treated him differently. If he had arrived in another luxury vehicle, perhaps nobody would have questioned why he was holding those keys. But that would not have made the outcome better. It would only have hidden the problem. The old pickup had revealed something the new vehicle never could. It showed how quickly appearance could become a story in someone else's mind. An hour later, the service advisor returned Marcus's keys. Everything looks great. You are all set. Marcus thanked him and walked toward the exit. Richard was standing near the doors. Mr. Bennett, he said. Marcus stopped. Richard hesitated before continuing. I wanted you to know I have thought about what you said. Marcus waited, especially the part about the next customer. Richard looked toward the showroom. Last week, a young man came in wearing work clothes and asked about one of our most expensive vehicles. My first thought was that he was probably just looking. Marcus watched him carefully. What did you do? I asked what he needed. Richard gave a quiet smile. He bought it. Marcus nodded. And if he had not? Richard understood the question immediately. He still deserved the same respect. Marcus extended his hand. Richard shook it. There was no victory in the gesture and no suggestion that one apology erased what had happened. It was simply acknowledgement that change had to appear in future choices, or it meant nothing. Marcus walked outside. Morning sunlight reflected across the black paint of his vehicle. He unlocked it with the same key fob that had once rested on the hood while patrol cars entered the lot. This time, it was only a key. That was how it should have been from the beginning. He opened the driver's door, then noticed David standing near the entrance. Mr. Bennett, David called. One more thing. Marcus turned. David held up a copy of the dealership's revised customer verification policy. Regional adopted it at all 7 locations. Marcus looked at the document, surprised. Because of what happened here. Because what happened here showed us a weakness we should have seen ourselves. Marcus nodded slowly. That mattered. Not because his name would appear anywhere. It would not. Not because Richard had been embarrassed. Marcus had never wanted that. It mattered because somewhere at another dealership, another customer might arrive in work boots, an old truck, or clothes that did not match someone's expectation of wealth, and the employee standing across from that person would now be instructed to check facts before turning assumptions into accusations. Marcus climbed into his vehicle and started the engine. As he pulled out of the lot, he passed the exact space where his silver pickup had been parked 6 weeks earlier. He remembered Richard looking at that truck before deciding what kind of customer Marcus must be. Then he remembered the registration, the confirmation email, the 2 keys, and the sales record that had been available all along. Marcus had never needed those things to establish his dignity. They had only established ownership. That was the distinction Richard had finally learned. Money could buy a vehicle. A database could confirm a transaction. A key could unlock a door. But none of those things should determine whether a person is treated with basic respect. Richard had called the police believing he was protecting an expensive car from the wrong man. The truth was quieter and far more powerful. The car already belonged to Marcus. The only thing that needed changing was the judgment standing between the owner and his own keys.